us. You created us in our mother's womb. You have made all things for your glory. And we ask that you help us in our daily lives, that what we do, say, and think, and also who we are, that we will be the people that do give you glory. Father, we thank you for this time tonight and ask your blessings upon what we talk about, that your word and the things that we say and think about will help us to be better servants of yours, and to better understand ourselves and other people, to be servants to others, to care for others, to know how to love better and best. And we make this prayer in the mighty name of Jesus Christ. Amen. It's great to be back with you and to talk about this subject with you. As you know already, we're kind of putting in some building blocks here, some principles that will help you throughout your life, and also help you to help other people and help you with your children. What I'm going through with you on this, I believe that we need to be teaching our children this at the earliest of ages. Now, you do it with different words, of course, and do it in an age-appropriate way. But these types of things that we're going to be talking about and have already talked about are for all of us. And these will help you. They will bless your life. I use this myself. And even though nothing that I say is a panacea, there are many other things that could be said about our subject and how to deal with things. This is a very, very powerful tool that God has given us and shown us in His Word. We're going over that. Right now we're hitting things very heavily on the Scripture side, because I want you to be able to see later when we're talking about other things that what we're talking about are very solidly resting on a foundation, the rock of Jesus Christ. And so very much the Word of God. So you remember our formula. Have you memorized it yet? Are you using it yet? I have people all the time come and tell me that this has been so helpful for them, and it's helpful to me to just remember the way that your soul operates. Now, you may have a feeling, and that might be the first idea. Feelings are monitors. They are energy, but they monitor. And sometimes the first thing you recognize is, I have a feeling. And what I want to do is identify that feeling. What is it I'm feeling here? And it could be more than one feeling. It could be contradictory feelings. Your soul is big enough to handle a broad spectrum of feelings at the same time. But you're feeling something. What is it? So then you backtrack and you say, what was I thinking about just before I started feeling this feeling? And whether it's a positive or negative feeling or not, it's going to come from that thought. Now, sometimes those thoughts are buried beneath a lot of feelings that we haven't dealt with those thoughts. And so what we do is we say, okay, well, here's the thought that I'm having. Is this thought logical, rational? Is it a constructive thought? Is it a destructive thought? Is it realistic? Just because you think something or feel something does not make it right, does not make it true. It's true that you think it or feel it, but it's not necessarily reality. And we need to remember that, because we get hung up in this. This is my reality. And with certain types of disorders like personality disorders, oftentimes people are hung up in that emotion. This is the world right now, and everything is filtered through that. So we want to be able to rise above the fray, you might say, and be able to, when necessary, challenge those thoughts. So once we determine this thought that's causing this feeling, the feeling, if you change the thought, the feeling can change in a split nanosecond. Pow! Just like that. And I bet you've experienced it over and over and over again in your life. Stephen Covey, in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, mentions something, and I'm going to elaborate on the story a little bit, about the man who got on the subway car with his 2 little boys, and the man had a place to sit. This was in New York City. You know, New York City never sleeps. It's almost as busy at 3 o'clock in the morning as it is at 12 noon. Something always going on. And so this crowded subway car was there. The man sat down. His boys proceeded to run up and down the aisles, cussing, spitting, yelling, fighting, and making a nuisance of themselves. People were getting so upset. It was a Sunday morning, and even in New York City, Sunday mornings, people still would prefer it to be a little more quiet than other times. So people were getting angry badly about this man, about his children. Finally, some old lady from the back jumps up and stomps up to the front and points her finger at him and gives him a tongue lashing. What kind of a father are you? You must be a very bad father. Your kids are running up and down the aisles, cussing, spitting, pushing, fighting, hitting, all and disturbing everybody. What's wrong with you? And the man looked up very humbly. He said, and of course everybody's listening to hear what's going to happen here, but he said, I'm very sorry, my children are a problem. They're acting out right now, and I apologize for that. But you see, we just came back from the hospital where their mother died about 10 minutes ago, and I guess we're all trying to figure out what is going on within us right now. In a split nanosecond, everybody on that subway car who were feeling hatred and rage towards this man and his children felt sorrow and love and compassion. How does that happen? You see, the thought changed. The interpretation of what was happening changed. And when it did, the emotion changed. That's how fast it can happen. It doesn't always happen that fast. Some things are more of a slower burn. But once you have a feeling, whether that comes from healthy thinking or unhealthy thinking, you have to do something with that feeling. And unless it's just temporarily to get away from a certain situation, the worst thing you could do is repress it and stomp it down and say, I'm going to pretend it's not there, or I'm going to push it out. And the reason for that is it will build up. And there will be other things that you're going to push down. We all do it. But you're going to push that down. And you'll push something else down and something else and something else. And after a while, you have a pressure cooker. You know, the good thing about a pressure cooker is it has a valve that lets the steam out so that you can cook the food. But what would happen if you crimped that valve or drove a nail down the hole of that valve so the steam couldn't get out? What would happen? You're going to have an explosion. And that explosion could and has killed people. That explosion could hurt people. And at the very least, it's going to make a mess. Your heart and your soul are the same way. You have to let those feelings out, but you have a choice of how you will do it. How will I express this feeling in a good, godly, healthy way? In a way that works for me instead of against me. So there's the behavior. And, I thought I had advanced that up there. So we have that. There's the event, there's the cognition, the thought, the affect, the behavior, and then there are going to be consequences. So we're looking at all that. And we'll look at this much more in detail later. But if you are experiencing an emotion and you don't know what to do with it, then seek some help from somebody else with that. You ideally can take the major emotions and write a list of positives and negatives, things that you can do that are constructive with each of the emotions. So that when you do have those emotions, you have a repertoire to go to. I think I mentioned maybe on the first time that sometimes I'll have a husband and wife there, and the husband may look at the wife and say, I know I shouldn't have hit you. I did the wrong thing, but you made me do it. And I'm like, oh, whoa, wait 1 minute here. Nobody made you do anything. You had a choice. Oh, no, it wasn't a choice. It happened so fast, it was just like that, and I socked her. And I'm like, well, you did. It may be that you never had training of how to handle your anger. which is usually the case. What do I do? Sometimes people ask, what do I do when I get angry? I don't know anything but hit. Well, that's not going to work for you. How's that working for you? You know, you went to jail, lost your kids, lost your wife. You know, how would that work for you? Very good? I don't think so. And most will say that. I ask sometimes people, I'll say, can you imagine a day where you don't feel rage most of the day? And I won't use the word that they use, but they'll say, yes, and it scares the daylights out of me. You see, that anger is a protective type of a thing for them because they're afraid of something else. But more on that later. So, last week, did we do this? We were talking about what's on the inside comes out. One way or another, you will behave. Your body will react to what you're thinking and feeling. And I know we talked about this some on the first session about hormones. Your body, for every emotion, your thoughts produces hormones, and they need to be worked out in a constructive, healthy way. And so Jesus didn't talk about hormones to people living back then, but in Matthew 12:33 through 35, he says, "For out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. The good man brings good things out of the good stored up in him, and the evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in him." It's also in Luke 6:43 through 45. So what's on the inside will come out. And that's why what we're doing tonight, and if you'll practice the things we're talking about, they'll help you in having more good in the inside. Is there anybody in here who says that you are totally pure on the inside? I don't think anybody raised their hand. I'm certainly not going to. So this is something we can always work on. In Mark 7:20 through 23, as Jesus speaking here again, he went on, "What comes out of a man is what makes him unclean. For from within, out of men's hearts, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly." And we probably could have listed a lot of other things. All these evils come from inside and make a man unclean. So that's why it's so vitally important that we we guard our hearts and our minds so that we have more good coming out than the evil. Did we talk about Jeremiah 17? I'm going to give you a thumbnail sketch on some things here that we're going to leave out a lot. But you know the Old Testament prophet Jeremiah, one of the major prophets, is one of the longer prophetic books. And in chapter 17, verse 9, there's an interesting statement here. "The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it?" So the background from that, didn't God make the heart? Didn't He? He made the heart for all of us. Is anything that God made bad? Isn't everything He made good? So what in the world is Jeremiah talking about here? The heart is deceitful above all things. You have to go into the context of what's happening. As you know, the Jews had been sinning for many centuries, many years, breaking God's commandments in many different ways, not loving Him or neighbor or self in the ways that would be constructive for us and healthily related to God. So that had been going on. They were worshiping false gods. They were committing adultery, etc., etc., etc. God sent prophet after prophet to them to try to tell them to straighten up, live by the covenant that they and their forefathers had made with God. And they beat the prophets, they killed the prophets, they ostracized them, they ran them out of town, they did all sorts of bad things to the prophets. So what happened is God finally says, don't look for this in the scriptures, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but God pretty much says, I'm done. We tried it the easy way, now we're going to have to do this the hard way. So He goes and finds Jeremiah and tells Jeremiah, I want you to go to the Jewish king and tell the Jewish king that I'm going to send Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the Babylonians. Babylon was the superpower of the day. And I'm going to have Nebuchadnezzar, he's going to come here to Judah. He's going to capture you guys and take you back to Babylon for 70 years as slaves. And then I'll let you hit the reset button, you'll be released, and you can come back and start the country again. There's only one thing, Jeremiah, you've got to tell the king, when Nebuchadnezzar comes, stand down. Don't fight him. If you do, I'm going to let him wipe out 90% of you, pretty much. And there'll only be a remnant left. Well, Jeremiah knows where this is going. This would be about like if God were to come to me or you and say, I want you to go up to Washington, D.C. and talk to the President and the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon and tell them to let Russia and China take over America for 70 years, and then after 70 years, I'll let you have America back. So Jeremiah knows where this is going. It's just going to fly like a lead balloon, and he tries to get out of it. He says, God, they're not going to listen. God says, yeah, I know they won't, but I want there to be a witness that I told them so. So what happens? Nebuchadnezzar comes, or is coming. The king gets some false prophets to come. And false prophets, you always know, false prophets are like false friends. They tell you what you want to hear, not what you need to hear. A real friend is going to say, they're going to jerk you by the ear and say, hey, you're out of line here, I think. And I say that because I love you. And you might be angry, you might not like what they say. I don't always, but that's a real friend. They're going to tell you, when they think you're out of line. And we all need that sometimes. Well, the false prophets told the king, look, God's temple, Yahweh's temple is in Jerusalem. And Yahweh would never allow His temple to fall. Now that cognition, that thinking made sense to the king. Needless to say, the Bible says that the temple was full of idols of false gods that they were worshiping in Yahweh's temple. So what happens is when the king's thinking, he thinks, okay, Yahweh's temple's here, He won't let it fall, so if we fight Nebuchadnezzar, we'll beat him. Nebuchadnezzar comes, they fight him. King has courage based on what the false prophets have said. His behavior is to fight the Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar whips them bad, kills 90% of the Jews, and then takes the king himself and murders, slaughters his own sons and daughters before his very eyes, and then gouges the king's eyes out so that the last thing he will ever remember seeing are his sons and daughters being murdered. And then they put a hook in his nose and put it on a chain, and they drag him. I don't think you really have to drag somebody. Once you tug that chain a couple of times, I think you'll kind of run behind the chariot. But they drag him back to Babylon. It's not a short distance. Depending on how you go, you're going to go, 700, 800 miles or more than 1,000 miles. They probably didn't go straight across the desert. They probably went up one of the highways that they had back in those days. And so it's probably a long way. So, as you know, 70 years happened. The Nebuchadnezzar and his group are down, and then the Jews are let go. They come back and start their country again. The idea when Jeremiah, when the false prophets said that God will never let Jerusalem or the temple fall, that's when Jeremiah is saying the heart's deceitful above all things. In other words, if your feelings are not directed by healthy thinking, it can get you in a lot of trouble. You hear a lot of times this statement, let your heart be your guide. Your heart is a wonderful monitor, but you want to know what thinking is behind these feelings. Really to look in and do some research there on that. Sometimes we have intuition of things and the intuition is very good, but a lot of times I've heard this, oh, I love this boy or this girl. I know they're a drug addict, but they'll change. I'm just knowing my heart, they will. My heart tells me they will. Well, that's not good thinking there, and it very seldom happens in a good way. All right, so remember that our thinking and our feelings need to be filtered here before we make behavior. Now, another passage that again shows us this formula that we're talking about is Numbers chapter 13 and 14. You know the story about how Joshua and Caleb and the 12 spies, all the 12 spies went into Canaan land. And they went out, and God had told them, this is the land I promised your forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give to their descendants forever. And I want you to go in and take the land. I will give you victory. So Moses sends in 12 spies, one representing each of the 12 tribes of Israel. And they go into the land, and they come back out on a designated day. And Joshua and Caleb are the first two to speak. And they say this, and think about the cognition here, and the feelings, and the behavior. God, it's just like God said. The land is a land flowing with milk and honey. Now notice that, just like God said. And they said the Canaanite people are big and tall. The Jews were small in stature. They're big and tall, but, here's the cognition also, God will give us victory. And that produced in Joshua and Caleb courage and bravery, and they're ready in their behavior to go pick up swords and spears and let's go fight. The other 10 spies say, whoa, hold your horses. The majority say, hold your horses. The land is a land flowing with milk and honey, just as Joshua and Caleb said. See, we've already got something off here. Instead of just as God said, as Joshua and Caleb said. But they said, those Canaanites are so big and tall, we look like grasshoppers in their sight. Now, whose sight did they really look like they were grasshoppers in? Their own. We call this the grasshopper mentality. You've probably heard that before. But and embedded in that is that if we go in there, we're dead meat, man. And that produced in them fear and cowardice. And their behavior was, and get a load of this, their behavior was they want to go back to Egypt. So they're packing bags or wanting to pack bags to go back to Egypt. Now think about that. They were 400 years in slavery in Egypt. Think about this. What if we took somebody, an African American, out on the street there and said, hey, let's go back to slave master day. I'm going to be slave, you're going to be master. Now how far do you think you're going to get with that? Not very far. You know, and rightfully so, not very far. But these people were ready to go back to slavery. 400 years of it. And God was so angry with those people that He told them, none of you of this generation will go into the promised land. Not even Moses, for a different reason, but none of this generation will go into the promised land. Your sons and daughters, sons and grandsons will go into the land, but you will not. You're going to wander in this desert for 40 years, which is what happened, and then Joshua and Caleb led them into the promised land. Do you see the thoughts, feelings, behavior, consequences? It's all over the Bible. One last one here, David and Goliath. Goliath is 9 feet 6 inches tall. Now my oldest son is 6'6", and my youngest son is 6'3". But I look at my boys sometime, I think, dude, Goliath was 3 feet taller than you guys. I would not want to meet him in a dark alley somewhere, and I wouldn't want to be on the sharp end of his spear. But what's happened here is there's a mountain or a hill here and a mountain hill here. There's a valley in here where they fight. The Philistines are over here with Goliath, and the Jews are over here with their army. Goliath, his thinking, his cognition is, I'm big, the Jews are small, I can whoop them. That gives him courage and bravery, and what he does is I'm really not drunk, I'm tripping over this thing here, but it gives him courage and bravery, and he goes down alone down in the valley every day. He curses God and the Jews and says, send somebody down here to fight me. If I kill him, then we take you as slaves. You kill me. You do whatever you want to with us. Over on the other side, the Jews are over here, and they're thinking, their cognition is, he's big, we're small, he can whoop us, and that produces in them fear, and their behavior is, we ain't going down there. We're staying up here and hiding in the rocks and crevices here in this mountain. So one day there's a little shepherd boy who apparently is under 12 years old, and I'll tell you in a minute why I think he's under 12. David he has some brothers in the Jewish army, and he's bringing milk and cheese to them. And so he hears what Goliath says one day. And so David says, and hear his cognition, it made him angry hearing what Goliath was saying. And so he said, I'll kill that Philistine. God will give me victory. That gave him courage and bravery. And his behavior was what we're about to talk about. Now, they try to put armor on him. Of course, Saul was big and tall, but it didn't fit. So David then takes what he knew well. He knew how to throw a sling and sling stones. He gets 5 smooth stones. He only used one. But I love what, in the Hebrew language, it doesn't always come out in English so well, but when David went down the mountain to meet Goliath, it says he was running full steam. There's some ways I could say that I'm not going to say in church, but anyway, he was really hauling down that mountain, running full steam towards Goliath. Now, if it had been me, I'd have probably been trying to hide behind this rock and this tree and kind of work my way down the mountain, but David's running right straight at him. Even Goliath is surprised. And Goliath says, "What is this? You're sending a little puppy dog down here to fight me?" And he curses David and the Jews, and David says his thing and takes his sling and slings the stone, kills Goliath. He goes over to Goliath, takes Goliath's sword, cuts Goliath's head off to drag it back to King Saul. I had one client one time say, "Boy, they got to do all the fun stuff then." I said, "Yeah, today we would have arrested David for war crimes." But, he goes back and does that. But do you see that, even in this story? Thoughts, feelings, behavior, consequences for everybody involved. So once that does happen, Goliath is dead. Then the Jews say, now we can fight him, and they go down and they kill the Philistines. So this is a little sideline. Why do I think David was under 12? I don't know this for sure. The Bible doesn't tell us exactly how old he was. Many cultures that I've lived in do not have a period of adolescence like we do in America and the Western world. This period between 12 and 19, 20, 21 years old, where a person is supposed to be half adult and half child, and we have all these identity crises and other things that happen at that time. Now, with many cultures, about the time of 12 to 13 years old, they go through a ceremony, a rite of passage. And so it depends on the tribe or the culture, they will have some kind of ceremony they go through for boys and girls. And after this ceremony, they are considered to be adults. So in the Meru tribe that I lived in, at first in Africa, they circumcise at between 13 and 15 years old. They circumcise both boys and girls. And after that, they have to do this without showing any pain and flinching. So they go through a month or so of preparation. They learn how they get them into a trance. They're not taking drugs and they're not drunk or anything like that, but they get them into a trance to where they have dissociated themselves from their body, really. And they go through the ceremony. If they flinch or show any pain or cry, they'll have a name that will follow them, an ugly name the rest of their life, the crying one, or something like that. And so, but after that, they are considered adults. Boys in all the cultures that I have been in are considered in that first age set, that first time of life, they're considered to be warriors. In Kimeru, you call them Ntaka. In Maasai, they would be Maran, and different ones, different. Now, the Jews today have a rite of passage at about 12 or 13 years old for boys and girls. You know what the boys is? I bet you do. Bar mitzvah, yes. Bar means son of, and mitzvah of the law, son of the law. Girls, the bat mitzvah, daughters of the law. And so this is why I think that David was under 12 years old, 13 years old, because if he had had his bar mitzvah by this time, he would have been in the army, most likely, unless he got married, because if he got married, the law said, this is an interesting one, said you're not to fight in the army the year after you get married, so that you can, does anybody remember? So that you can learn how to please your wife. Okay? No, so that was what we were just looking at right there. If you're writing that in. All right, we will not get through this one tonight. We're going to unpack each of these verses. Philippians 4 through 9, I believe this is Paul's prescription for good mental health. Now, that's not the reason he wrote it. I'm adding that, but to say that this helps us with our mental health. But he says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you." Now, that's twice in these the short 6 verses here that he mentions the God of peace or the peace of God. Doesn't that sound good? Isn't that where you want to be? So let's look at this first verse. I'm sorry. There we go. 4:4. Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. Now, I don't believe that what Paul is saying, I don't believe what the Holy Spirit is saying here is that your wife is raped, your son is murdered, your house burns down. I don't think he's saying rejoice. What he's talking about here is the general way you live your life. A life of rejoicing. Now, this is a command, it's not a suggestion. So how do you do it? How do we rejoice? How do we live that life of rejoicing? I'm going to suggest some things for you right here. To rejoice, you have to focus on the positive and be joyful about the blessings you have now, or that you had in the past that you might not have now, but you had them, you enjoyed them then, or that you will have in the future, that you expect to have in the future. And I'm going to finish the bullets here, and I'm going to come back to the mindfulness part. But anyone will get depressed if they focus on bad and negative things in their life. Now let's face it, every last one of us here has yuck in our lives. None of us gets out of life without having yuck. All right? And it may be different for you than me, but I'll guarantee you we all have it. But if we focus on that, and not recognize, which is the most for most of us, the good blessings around us, then we're probably going to be depressed or angry. Depressed people, the research is clear, depressed people have at least 10 to 15 negative self-statements. They play like a broken record in their self-talk. We are talking to ourselves, remember, all the time inside. Now, if you keep telling yourself, I'm a loser, nobody likes me, I'll never be a success, blah, 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 you keep doing that, it only takes about 10 or 15 times a day before you're going to throw yourself into a depression or into a rage or something on the negative side of the scale. So remember that. I have clients that sometimes are saying those negative things as many as 250 times a day, because we try to track them if we can on some of this. And no wonder that they feel depressed. Jesus would be depressed with that, I think. So challenge the irrational, unrealistic negatives like awfulizing and horribilizing. Now, what do I mean by that? Those are 2 words that are not in the dictionary. We made them up for counseling. You're going to work one day, you spill some milk on the floor, and you say, "Oh, this is horrible, my day is ruined. It's awful." And you come and see me a few more hours, I'm going to challenge you on that. And I'm saying, did that really ruin your day on that? Well, Dr. Searcy, it's just a small thing. I told you about this before, didn't I? About the moths and the lights and all this, you have a thought here hasn't been dealt with. I'm going to say, well, how many other things today happened that you haven't dealt with? Small things. There's a dump truck that goes down the road here periodically, and it's full of sand. and it weighs, I don't really know how many tons, I'll say 6 tons, might be more than that. But if you went out there and to say, I want to find out why this weighs so much, and you took a grain of sand and tried to put it on a scale, you wouldn't be able to weigh it on most scales. You'd have to have a super sensitive scale to do it. But whatever it weighs, when you have billions of them, it makes a difference. It weighs tons. And that's the same thing with our thoughts that are undealt with. These little thoughts, they build up, they add weight, and eventually they've tipped over the scale in our feelings. So we want to get there. We call those thoughts, when we have a thought like that, when we horribilize or awfulize, we call those ANTs, A-N-T-S, that stands for automatic negative thoughts. What do you do with an ant when you see it in your house? You're going to stomp on it, or you're going to spray it. You're going to deal with that ant, spider or something like that. You don't want that in there. It's the same thing with these negative thoughts that we have. We want to learn to deal with them as quickly as possible. And then we don't have so much problem with our feelings and our behaviors then. So if we're going to focus on something, let it be that you get a notebook. This is a very practical thing. And in that notebook, you write down every blessing you can think of that you had in the past. You may not have it now, but you had it in the past. I think of myself, of being, I thank God every day that God let me be a father. It was the greatest experience of my life. I still am a father, but my kids are grown up, so I'll say a father of small children. My first wife died when my kids were 5, 3, and 2 years old, and I was a single dad living overseas in a third world country in Kenya, in Africa, for 14 years before I married again. But I thank God for that time that I had with my children. I was with them when they were, I helped my wife give birth to the 2 boys. We adopted my daughter. She couldn't have done it without me, really, but you know. But first one was by C-section. The other one was by it came the normal way, and so I'm thankful because with all of my children in utero, when they were in the womb, I would sing and pray to them. I'd wake them up, you know, hey baby, you know. I've got some really cool stories if we ever have time to do that about that. But it was wonderful. Just, you know, even when they were born, they remembered my voice. And so it's kind of interesting. But so what are the blessings you had in the past? Write them down. Look at them. And every day that you can, and you think of another one, you write it down whenever you think of one. You'll fill that book up. Yes? You're apt to, there you go. Thank you for that. That's good. I hadn't heard that one. So then we have things that are promised in the future. Now we all are looking forward to going to be with God when we die, and this is a wonderful thing. Write those down. What are the things you're looking forward to? But not just that, but things like, if you have children anyway, you know, I know when my kids were little, I looked forward to the time when they graduated from high school or college, or when they got married or had children or whatnot. Even if you've never had children, there will be things that you can look forward to in your life, and that those can be blessings to you. But where I really want to spend a little more time here is with the here and now. You know, the past, whatever has been the past for you, is eternal. There's not one thing you can do about it to change it. It's done. It's over. So learn from it, but don't live there. The future's not here yet. And I will guarantee you, whatever you think is the future, it can change in a heartbeat, big time, fast, unexpectedly. So we don't really have the future yet. We can kind of project and think about that, and that's good. But we have the here and now. This is the only place you do have a place you can do something with. and that is today. So today, how can you make the most of it? What are your blessings today? Now, I have some things here. Today we call it mindfulness. It's kind of like stopping and smelling the roses. Relaxation with guided imagery. Focusing on your breathing. Write a list of your blessings, as we've just mentioned. But there are a number of things that we can do to focus on the here and now. I didn't write a body scan here. This is something I try to do often during the day. But just take a second. It doesn't take long for you to scan your senses. What do you see that is pleasing to you right now? You know, I see the smile on some of y'all's face. That's pleasing to me right now. Try to think about it, name and describe at least 5 things when you do the body scan. 5 things you see. 5 things that you hear. Okay? I used to have my counseling office outside when I was in Kenya, and there were all sorts of sounds that you could hear of animals and as well as cars and things like that. But what are these things that I'm hearing right now? How many different sounds may I be hearing? What's pleasing? What's not? What do I smell? What do I taste? What do I feel tactile on my skin, outside and inside? You know, what's the temperature? Do that body scan in the here and now. It helps to ground you, and you can do it in a second or two. Can be very, very helpful. Okay, now that usually means halftime, Mac. All right, I think we're done for that, and we'll have to start here next time because I'm not finished on this verse yet. We have a couple of more slides with it. Again, it's been wonderful being with you tonight, and I hope you've gotten a lot from it.